This is our third webinar in the series of 6 webinars that we are organizing in lieu of the regular Vietnam Advocacy Day, which usually was filled with meetings in Congress and meetings at the State Department, at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and at several DC-based human rights organizations that have been our partners. So this year is an exception because of the pandemic. So we have to switch over to the virtual meetings and conference. But actually, there's an advantage to that because now we have viewers from different parts of the world. Last Friday, we had our first set of webinars, and there were about 20,000 viewers on Facebook live stream, in addition to about 200 registered participants. So that was quite good for the people who cannot attend in person. So I'd like to start this week's webinar today. There will be 2 webinars, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So the morning one focuses on Vietnam's cybersecurity law and its impact on freedom of expression, the press, and the internet. And we have 3 speakers. First of all, we have Carl Horberg, who's a senior program officer with Freedom Now. And then we have Senator John Cornyn. We regret that he cannot be with us in person, but we truly appreciate that he sent a pre-recorded video, and I'd like to acknowledge that in past years, Senator Cornyn has always been there with us to speak to us on Vietnam Advocacy Day. That's our annual event since 2012. And also, we would like to acknowledge the participation of Senator Marco Rubio from Florida. And again, he cannot be with us in person, but one of his staff will read his statement. So with that, I would like to start with Mr. Carl Horberg. And Carl is a senior program officer of Freedom Now, which is based in DC. It's a human rights organization that protects individuals and communities from government repression and defends human rights through direct legal support, targeted high leverage advocacy, and capacity building analysis and assistance. Since its inception, Freedom Now has advocated for the release of more than a dozen Vietnamese prisoners of conscience, 7 of whom are free today. And I still remember those days, those early days of Freedom Now, and we worked together maybe 20 years ago, maybe or more, on the first case and that was the case of Father Nguyen Van Ly, probably the best known prisoner of conscience in Vietnam. And in his role, Mr. Horberg manages Freedom Now's advocacy activities and designs campaigns to free political prisoners. Prior to joining Freedom Now, Mr. Horberg was a program officer for Connect US Fund, where he oversaw a grant portfolio of $2 million US. He holds a BA in political science from American University and a master's degree in human rights from the London School of Economics. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Tong. Good morning. Before I begin my remarks, I want to thank both People SOS and Dr. Tong for organizing this event. It's crucial that in these unprecedented times, we keep the focus on human rights and deny authoritarian governments the opportunity to hide from scrutiny as the world addresses the COVID threat. As mentioned in the introduction, I am the Senior Program Officer with Freedom Now, a human rights organization working to end arbitrary detention around the world. Vietnam, as many of you are no doubt aware, is one of the worst perpetrators of arbitrary detention. At last count, more than 280 activists are currently imprisoned, a massive increase over the last several years. How do we account for this increase? Much of it has to do with revisions made to Vietnam's criminal code and recent laws on cybersecurity. I'd like to spend the next few minutes discussing these laws and their problematic nature. Vietnam's 2013 constitution guarantees a number of rights to its citizens, including the right to freedom of expression. Unfortunately, other constitutional provisions expressly operate to limit this right. For example, the government may restrict the human rights of its citizens where it is determined by law to be in the interest of national defense. Additionally, the salient role of the Communist Party of Vietnam as the most powerful party is established in various provisions of the Constitution, such as Article 4, which states that the CPV is the leading force for the state and society. Thus, while purporting to guarantee individuals' rights, the Constitution serves instead to provide a framework in which such rights can only be exercised when not in opposition to the CPV's interests. In January 2018, a new criminal code came into effect that included harsher penalties and more expansive provisions for the crimes with which government critics are most commonly charged. Previously, the criminal code included broad provisions that were worded vaguely enough to criminalize a range of protected free speech activities. For example, a journalist or blogger reporting on government policy might be charged with undermining the unity policy or conducting propaganda against the state. The amended criminal code preserved all of these problematic provisions and generally increased the length of the sentences. The punishment for conducting propaganda against the state rose its minimum time of imprisonment from 3 to 5 years. The amended criminal code also included a new range of preparatory offenses, which criminalize any person who makes preparation for the commitment of a criminal offense. There is no requirement that such person has either specific intent to commit a crime or has taken direct action towards such crime's completion for such preparation to have occurred, a vagueness which thus allows the government to prosecute anyone for any speech or action deemed to be preparatory. In theory, these provisions would permit prosecution not just for a person writing a critical blog post, but also for a person who is merely walking into a cyber cafe. On their face, several of these laws are clearly in violation of international law's protection for freedom of expression. Infamously, Article 331 of the amended criminal code criminalizes the abuse of freedom of speech and other democratic freedoms to infringe upon the interests of the state, lawful rights, and interests of organizations and/or citizens. This wording impermissibly restricts all civil and political rights within the bounds of the government's interests. Beyond the criminal code, Vietnam has passed several laws ostensibly in the interest of national security or press freedom, but that actually restrict online or media freedom of expression. The 2015 law on cyber information security regulates network information systems to ensure the security of online information. Yet the law also includes provisions that undermine the privacy of individuals by requiring businesses that provide encryption services to be based in Vietnam and to provide user data when requested to the Ministry of Public Security. Without any apparent restrictions on when and why the government can request such information, human rights defenders risk having their private communications monitored and used in nefarious ways. Decree 72, issued in 2013, notoriously mandated that blogs and social websites can only be used to share personal information and prohibited the sharing of news articles and material that harm national security or oppose the Vietnamese government. Decree 174, effective since 2014, imposed fines on anyone criticizing the government, defaming government leaders, or spreading propaganda on social media. It also includes a provision requiring internet service providers to place their primary servers inside Vietnam. In 2019, a new cybersecurity law took effect. This law requires corporations such as Google and Facebook to store their data inside Vietnam and to turn over user data to the Vietnamese government when requested. Effectively, the law gives the government enhanced authority to surveil the internet, including the ability to force international technology companies with operations in the country to reveal their users' personal data and censor online information on demand. How have these laws been implemented in practice, and what has been the impact on civil society and freedom of expression in Vietnam? We can say without a doubt that the over-criminalization of protected activities has nurtured a climate of comprehensive government repression. Arrests have steadily increased since the revised criminal code and new cybersecurity law came into effect. The US State Department, using a conservative estimate, documented the detention of 19 individuals and conviction of 31 between January 1st and September 25th, 2019. This is the highest number of convictions in recent years. The majority of these convictions were linked to blogging and cybersecurity. This trend of arrests has continued into 2020. and June and July, we have seen arrests of members of the Independent Journalist Association of Vietnam for allegedly opposing the government. The organization's president, Pham Chi Yang, has been in prison since November 2019 after he published articles urging the European Union to reject the free trade agreement with Vietnam over human rights concerns. We've also seen the government implement strict censorship regimes to erase evidence of discontent. For example, Facebook was blocked for several days in May 2016 during widespread protests regarding the Formosa waste spill. More recently, the government has stepped in to scrub social media posts regarding the years-long Dong Tam land dispute. Online censorship is relatively easy to accomplish in Vietnam, as not only does the government has a massive group of paid online commentators to shape public opinion, but it also has an entirely military task force, Force 47, that reportedly has over 10,000 members, constantly monitoring online activity, ready to pounce on any opinions that do not reflect the official government line. In discussing state censorship, we cannot, however, forget about the role of private corporations and their complicity in repressing freedom of expression. In July 2017, the Information and Communications Minister proudly reported that Google and Facebook removed more than 3,300 clips with bad and poisonous content after being requested to do so by the ministry. Facebook removed more than 600 accounts that were violating content restrictions. A bombshell report by Reuters in April revealed that through February and March 2020, the Vietnamese government pressured local internet service providers to take local cache servers offline. These cache servers allowed Facebook users to access content more quickly. Without the servers, access to Facebook and its subsidiary services, including WhatsApp and Instagram, ground to a halt. This had a cascading effect as Facebook and its services were trying to reach international servers to compensate, it overloaded cables and slowed down general internet usage in Vietnam. Rather than face the prospect of losing users, Facebook struck a deal with the Vietnamese government, agreeing to restrict more content as long as the servers went back online. These actions, the restrictive laws, the arrests of activists, and the complicity of corporations have a terrible chilling effect on civil society in Vietnam. It contributes to a citizenry that is more likely to blindly accept the government's official statements. This is particularly dangerous in the COVID-19 world. This leaves us to ask, what can be done? First, the Vietnamese government must amend its laws to comply with international standards. The criminal code should be specific rather than vague and should remove penalties for preparatory offenses. Second, the international community must use all available diplomatic, development aid, and trade tools available to condition closer bilateral relationships with Vietnam on measurable improvement of its human rights record. Finally, corporations must not be complicit in the restriction of internationally protected freedoms. We know here in Washington, technology companies such as Facebook and Google have considerable lobbying arms to influence legislation. These lobbyists ensure that cybersecurity laws such as those in Vietnam do not force technology companies, which are potential heralds of free speech, to be partners in oppression. By taking action in these areas, freedom of expression in Vietnam will be protected for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Now I would like to ask Dr. John Phan, a resident of San Antonio, Texas, and also a former member of our board of directors, to introduce Senator John Cornyn.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Phan. I'm a constituent of Senator John Cornyn. And on behalf of Mr. Jay Guerrero, who is the special delegate of Mr. Cornyn, is here today, it is an honor for me to introduce Mr. Cornyn today. Senator Cornyn was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2002 and is currently serving his third term. He sits on the Senate Finance, Intelligence, and Judiciary Committee, where he helped develop legislation on behalf of 28 million Texans like myself. So from 2013 and 18, Senator Cornyn was chosen by his college to serve as the second highest ranking position in the Republican Conference. He is a San Antonian native like myself, and Senator Cornyn has served the people of Texas for the last 3 decades as a district judge, as a member of Texas Supreme Court, and Texas Attorney General before he became a senator representing the state of Texas. Senator Cornyn is a great public servant to all Americans, but with the Vietnamese American, he is one of the most faithful friends. And this friendship is shown in his action. In February of this year, Mr. Cornyn and his Senate colleague, Mr. Rubio, they both wrote a letter to the Secretary of the State, urging the State Department to ask for the second property restitution agreement with the Vietnam government for the Vietnamese American like us who did not receive the rightful compensation for the property being confiscated by the Vietnamese Communist government. And just 2 weeks ago, frustrating with the Vietnamese government human rights violation, Senator Cornyn and Senator Rubio again sent a letter to the U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, asking the State Department to designate Vietnam as a country of particular concern and consider reenacting Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act to reverse Vietnam declining human rights situations. So thank you, Mr. Cornyn, and having concurrent commitment today. He cannot be here with us, but like I say, he sent his special delegate, Mr. Jay Guerrero, here. And please join me to greet Mr. Cornyn and Mr. Guerrero. Thank you.
So we will have a pre-recorded video played right now. Yes. There's no sound. Hello?
Hi, I'm Texas Senator John Cornyn. I want to wish you all a warm welcome to this year's Vietnam Advocacy Day. I know it looks a little different than last year's, but we appreciate you all participating amid this new normal. As a longtime advocate for human rights in Vietnam, I've continued to fight to end the tragic human rights abuses that are unfortunately still committed there. I'm also proud to have called on Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the administration to do all we can to end these intolerable practices. Thanks to the Boat People SOS for putting this webinar together and for all they do to represent the interests of the Vietnamese people in Texas and abroad. I hope you'll stay safe and keep up the great work.
And thank you, Senator Cornyn, and thank you, Jay. So please stay with us. We will have a Q&A. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Tuấn Nguyen, who's a resident of Florida and also our community engagement coordinator, to introduce Senator Marco Rubio.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tuấn Nguyen, a proud resident of Florida. And as you heard from the introduction of Senator Cornyn, Senator Marco Rubio has been a strong defender of human rights, and he has been very pioneering in human rights worldwide, not just in Vietnam. A brief introduction about Senator Rubio. He's born in Miami, Florida. He's the son of a Cuban immigrant. After earning a bachelor's degree from the University of Florida in 1993, he went to the University of Miami for his law degree. Senator Rubio's political career began with his election to the West Miami City Commission in 1998. He was then elected in the Florida House of Representatives the following year. In 2009, Senator Rubio won his campaign for the U.S. Senate and was re-elected in 2016. Of course, Senator Rubio has been a great supporter of our cause, but all his work cannot be done without the help of his staffers. And I have to say that every single time I came to Senator Rubio's office, we have been very warmly welcomed, and most of our requests, if not all, will be handled in a timely fashion in matter of days, sometimes in hours. With that, I have the pleasure to introduce two staffers of Senator Rubio, Bethany Poulos and Katie Perry.
Hello, can you see me? Can you hear me?
We are not
Let's see.
good.
Wonderful.
Okay. And Perry, Katie as well, please.
I think Katie should be on as well. Great. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for having us. And I'm sorry also that we can't all be in person, because it's always a wonderful time when we have the group up in Washington, D.C. meeting with us. So I'd like to read quickly a statement from Senator Rubio. I know he'd love to be here with you all as well. He is these days the acting chairman of the Intelligence Committee and he's the chairman of the Small Business Committee. So he's running around a lot of places. But let me read a statement from him. Dear friends, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the 2020 Vietnam Advocacy Day hosted by Boat People SOS to discuss the human rights situation in Vietnam. As we come together today, we recognize the Vietnamese government's continued religious persecution and crackdown on political dissidents. The fundamental rights of the Vietnamese people to practice their faith and religion according to their conscience, as well as have the freedom of expression, association, and assembly, must be respected and protected. The U.S. government must be clear that the U.S. relationship with Vietnam will not be able to ever reach its full potential while these abuses are going on. We must remain committed to pressing the Vietnamese government to release all Vietnamese political prisoners, many of whom were detained simply for defending the rights of the Vietnamese people. It is not only the moral thing to do, but this is also in our interest to have a Vietnam that is strong and a reliable partner, that is free and respects the rights of its people. I am thankful for all that Boat People SOS has done over the years to highlight the Vietnamese government's systematic violations against the Vietnamese people and help those seeking a better life. I will continue to advance policies in Congress that will hold Vietnam's government officials accountable and work to bring about a better future for the Vietnamese people. On behalf of all of Florida, I extend my best wishes to all virtually in attendance today and look forward to continuing to stand with you and the people of Vietnam in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bethany. Now I'd like to move on to the Q&A session, and we'd like to prioritize those questions for the two senators. And then we will still stay with Carl. So I would like to ask the technical team to please help me to identify questions. And in the audience, you may either type your questions and then we'll read them aloud for you, or you can raise your hand. There's an icon where you can click on to raise your hand, and then we'll invite you to speak.
I have a question, please.
Yes. Oh, Father Viet.
I would like to invite Father Viet from Florida. Would like to have his first question. So please proceed, Father Viet. Please open your mic.
Before that, may I introduce Father Viet, because this relates directly to Carl. Father Nguyen Vu Viet is the nephew of Father Nguyen Van Ly, and he spent years in prison as well, alongside Father Lee. Father Viet, please.
Father Viet, please open your mic.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you in the panel and listen to us on behalf of the senators from. I came here around 15 years ago under religious freedom, and I was a couple times, spent around 3 years in jail, in prison in Vietnam. So I'm honored to be here again. But the question I have today is the issue of religious freedom is again and again in many communist countries, especially now in Vietnam. And Senator Rubio is from Cuba, and he knows exactly what's going on there. One of the big concerns right now in the Diocese of Vinh, have the big problem because the government there control the diocese, and they push a lot of force to the bishop to move the priest according to their agenda. And another thing here is they call the Red Army, the Red Group, the flag Red Group. they control, and they really not the root from the government, but actually the hidden for the government to serve for the government, and they torture a lot of people, they arrest people illegally. So how can we, with your help, to address for the unvoiced people? Because if the Vietnamese government, they publicly to address these people, then people can recognize them. But this group, like hidden group, like terrorist group, but the government allow them to do so. It's very difficult and challenge for people in the diocese of Vinh, especially. So that's the, I would like you to address the issue to the State Department, and also to bring this issue to international level. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Father Viet. And let me clarify that a little bit. He was referring to the Red Flag Associations. These are organized mobs in the Nghệ An, mainly Nghệ An province. And they are organized and get support from the government, and they attacked the priests, the parishioners, terrorize them, beat them up, threaten them, especially after the ecological disaster caused by Formosa, the steel plants, Taiwanese steel plants that destroy not only the ecology, the fishery, the livelihood of a lot of parishioners. So many of the priests spoke out. And in order to subdue them, the government has been using the Red Flag Association. Yes.
So I could like to have a
question. You want to address that, or are you just taking notes and then bring it back?
I am taking notes. Reverend Nguyen, thank you for that information. That just sounds like another example of the Vietnamese government trying to fly under the radar in terms of their human rights and religious rights issues that they have. And the senator is absolutely interested in being able to address all of those activities that they're doing. They're trying to be seen as a government that is open to the various religions and churches out there. But obviously that's not happening. I will absolutely get your comments to the senator, Reverend.
Yeah, this is Bethany. I'll just add that it's for these exact reasons that Senator Rubio and Senator Corden just sent a letter to the secretary urging for Vietnam to be designated as a CPC. We have to keep raising these issues in every discussion we have with our Vietnamese counterparts and the Vietnamese government. And we also have to impose costs for this type of behavior and these human rights violations, whether that's through global Magnitsky sanctions or other tools available. And so, Senator Rubio and I know Senator Corden, they both care deeply about this issue, and we will continue to focus and until everyone is free and able to freely live out their faith and their beliefs according to their conscience.
Thank you. Now, Bethany and Jay, we have documented the command responsibility of some of the police officer, high-ranking police officers in those regions. So maybe share that information with your officers, and then maybe you can forward that information to the State Department. Because yes, they may be considering sanctions, targeted sanctions, but they need the information. They need to have the supporting evidence.
Yeah, please feel free to share that with us.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, and the next one here, I see Mr. Hian Pham, who also was a resident of Texas.
Yeah, hello everyone, and I want to send my thanks to Senator John Cornyn and Senator Marco Rubio for spearheading this effort of improving human rights condition in Vietnam and ensuring justice for us Vietnamese Americans. And the two senators pointed out in their letters to the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. Now, this topic is very dear to my heart, especially to the legacy of my parents. who took our family out of Vietnam in April 1975. Now, as soon as the Vietnamese Communist government moved in South Vietnam in 1975, they took over our family land, our home, and our ways of life. So my question to the senators, if you can relate it to the senators, is, your letter to the Secretary Pompeo dated in February 2020. Do you know the Secretary Pompeo has replied to the letter at all?
I do not recall, but I would have to look it up. And I believe Cornyn was the lead, so they may have it on hand, but I'm not sure. Jay, do you have that?
I'm here in the Houston office. I know the letter went out, but I don't have the specific response. But I know that, of course, both our offices are interested in pursuing that. I think that we're probably going to be working towards a more robust effort in that direction after we address these other situations that are on the ground, like the red-black associations and then all the activities that the government is doing against its people that are trying to practice their religion freely. So I think we're still looking at that. I don't have the specific exchange that they had with the State Department.
Yeah, I'll try to track that down. It might have been delayed because of COVID, and lots of things from the State Department are very delayed right now. But let me look in our tracker, and if we have the response, I'll make sure to pass it around.
We cannot hear you, Mr. Hian.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so my question to Mr. Carl Harbor, and can you share your thoughts of why the human rights for Hong Kong legislation passed through the Congress as very fast, in very short time? Can you share your thoughts why the human rights for Vietnam legislation kind of at a slower pace right now, and what's the reasons for that?
I think just generally right now, it's tough to pass anything through Congress, right? They are mostly focused on COVID relief. I would also say that Hong Kong captured a particular, it was kind of a movement that really captured the global imagination at a specific point in time. The abuses in Vietnam have been more slow moving. They've been across a greater period. So there wasn't a sense of, I think, urgency for Congress to do something on Vietnam so quickly, which is unfortunate.
This is Jay. I agree with Carl there. I think what you're doing here with Vietnam Advocacy Day and what BPSOS does on a daily basis is extremely critical. And you see in these types of movements of trying to get political action and change, you have to continue to bring the issues to the forefront, make them known, and there will always be some kind of issue out there that it's going to be competing with, but then you have your moment. And like Carl was talking about in Hong Kong, like in our nation with the recent killing of George Floyd, a lot of change can happen quickly. So I think that the positioning that you're doing and the conversation that you're continuing to have on these egregious actions that are occurring by the Vietnamese government it's very, very important. And we are, as you can tell in Senator Rubio's office and Senator Cornyn's office, we are very responsive. We are tracking. We're trying to best case those actions on our end whenever possible, and looking for the opportunity to move the needle even further.
And thank you. Now, any other questions, additional questions for the two senators? Because I know that Jay and Bethany might need to leave soon, so I'd like to give priority to the questions for the senators or requests. And thank you, Mr. Hill.
And I'll just add, feel free also to send my email around, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has at any time about the senator's work, or also if there are particular political prisoner cases. Senator Rubio likes to highlight cases, especially cases that maybe don't always get a lot of attention. We've done a number of Vietnamese cases, some successful, some we're still advocating for. But if you need to send any of those to us, please feel free and reach out to me anytime.
Yeah, thank you, Bethany.
Question?
Yes.
I am Van Ngo from Maryland, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Independent Journalists Association of Vietnam. So, as Carl have said, in the last 9 months, 3 of our members were arrested. So, since they were arrested, they were held in incommunicado from that time to now. Why other people who were arrested at about the same time were able to talk with their lawyers and their family? So we can't understand why other people can contact with their lawyers, but our members could not. So I would like you to the senators and also Mr. Carl Herbert to tell us how you can help our member to talk with their lawyers. Thank you.
Well, this is Bethany. I don't know all the specifics of the case or the cases, but if you send me an email with the information and sort of a status, I can sort of best advise on how we can be helpful. Just without knowing all the details, I'm not sure I can fully give advice on how to navigate it. But if you send that over, we'll certainly, our team will follow up.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. On this side too, as I mentioned earlier, we're always available to field any of these types of issues and requests. So just, I know that Dr. Nguyen and Tuan have my information, and any other questions that you all have, you can submit them after the fact, and we'll be glad to address them.
Yeah, please, Carl, please.
I'll just add, unfortunately, Vietnam is not great in terms of due process laws, right? They can hold an individual up to 2 years for an investigatory period. And during this investigation period, they can deny them access to lawyers, which it sounds like is happening here. And there isn't much that can be done on the legal side. Certainly, we can elevate these cases on the international side and try to get the UN or the US or the EU involved and make statements and pressure the Vietnamese government to do that. I will say that, Vietnam has been emboldened in recent years by lack of action from the international community. And we've seen them be rewarded in some way, such as through the EU-Vietnam trade agreement, which didn't really have very strong human rights language in it. And they've gone off and arrested individuals because they feel like they can go do this. The world isn't watching, but we should put as much light on these cases as we can to make sure that Vietnam knows these people aren't forgotten, that we are paying attention to these cases, and that action should be taken.
Dr. Nguyen, I know that on your, you sent an email to my colleagues, and at the bottom of your email, you mentioned of some specific cases that you all were advocating for and that you sent forward. And I spoke to my colleagues, and they said that they also advanced those cases for attention. And so there was 13 individuals, I think you had within the government that were having these issues in Vietnam that you were advocating against, and we were trying to also help out with that. So I'm sure that they've already sent that forward.
Thank you. To add some context here, the journalists, the members, the Independent Journalists Association of Vietnam, many of them used to work for the government. They work for a state-run, state-owned media, and then one day they decided to become independent, to exercise their own freedom of the press and freedom of expression. And now many of them, very prominent writers and journalists, are now in jail. So we have a concern about that because freedom of expression is very key. It's directly linked, intimately linked to the freedom of other rights, such as freedom of religion or belief, for instance. Yeah. So please, any further questions?
I think we're done.
If not, then I'd like to just point out that the issue of expropriated properties, I know that Bethany, you're an expert on that. Vietnam is, we have a huge caseload. So far, we have received about 734 cases registered with us. The peculiar thing is this: for Vietnam, the government didn't nationalize these properties that they occupy. They came in, they managed, they claimed that they will return the property to the owners one day, but then in 2003, they decided to nationalize everything. So the nationalization of the property occurred after we all had become US citizens. So that's why a claims program would work. But I would like also to point out that there are many cases of Americans, Vietnamese Americans, who invested in Vietnam as part of the bilateral trade agreement between the US and Vietnam. And then one day they saw their investment taken away. And there's no reason, there's no criminal charges against them at all. So how can we deal with that? Should we deal with it as part of the Vietnam claims program they're trying to push for, or as part of the BTA? So we might need some guidance on that later on. And thank you very much, Jay, and thank you very much, Bethany. And please send our best regards to the senators. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wen.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So Carl, you stay with us, right? Yes. So please, if you have questions, I saw some questions here. Can you, let me see. Sorry that Mr. Danchan had a question for the senator, but the staffer have gone. So we'll forward that to them. Sorry, Mr. Danchan. Now we have 20 minutes of Q&A with Carl. And I also would like to invite the co-panelists for the second part of this panel to please feel free to also exchange ideas or to ask questions for Carl. So Carl, while waiting for questions from the audience, how many cases of Vietnamese prison of conscience are you working on?
We're working on the case of Ho Van Hai, who was recently let go, released from prison in April, but still under 2 years of house arrest. Pham Kinh Khan we're also working on as well. Nguyen Van Hoa. Of course, we're still monitoring. I was very happy to see Father Viet show up. We've exchanged emails numerous times. We've never met in person, so it's great to see him. We still list Father Lee's case as active because he's still under house arrest for a few more years. And knowing him, he may get in trouble in the future. But those are the kind of the active cases we have right now. As you can tell, many of them are freedom of expression cases. Ho Van Hai, Pham Kinh Khan, Nguyen Van Hoa, all kind of slightly related to the Formosa waste spill and their blogging activities. So, you know, I think we've seen an uptick in the last couple of years or so of going after these freedom of expression cases in Vietnam. And one disturbing trend we've also seen is that there have been quite a few arrests of people who are just online commentators, people who just post comments on Facebook or on blogs. They don't really have any sort of history of activism, but the government has gone after those kind of people, widening the net of repression, if you will, which is a disturbing trend that we're seeing.
Carl, you might not have noticed one phenomenon that has become more and more prevalent in Vietnam, and some of the speakers on the second part of the panel will address that. So Vietnam came out with the cybersecurity law. And then in April of this year, there was a decree from the Prime Minister. It's called Decree 15, number 15, that even imposed more restrictions on freedom of expression under the guise of protecting the reputation and the dignity of individual citizens against defamation. But ironically, the Red Flag Association, for instance, or the opinion shapers, they've been very active in using the social media, the blogs to defame the priest, the different religious leaders, the dissidents, with almost absolute impunity. So the government is using double standard here. So on one hand, they use the same law to silence people, right? Under the guise of protecting other citizens' privacy and dignity. But at the same time, they encourage us, and they encourage and also protect their own people in defaming others, in spreading hate speech. And actually, the UN Human Rights Committee did raise that issue, did raise that concern at last year's ICCPR review of Vietnam. And they had that issue as part of their concluding observation, but so far nothing has been done. So do you have any idea about that, whether there's anything you can do about that to expose that kind of double standard?
Mm-hmm. I mean, pardon me, it's not surprising, right? Authoritarian governments don't use laws to promote equality. They use laws to protect their own power. And that's certainly what's happening here, right? They're using this law to imprison anyone who speaks out against the government while shielding anyone who protects it. So it's not, yes, it's par for the course, as we would say, among these authoritarian regimes. What can be done about it? I'm not totally certain. As I had mentioned, it's very disappointing that the European Union signed this trade agreement with Vietnam. There were, NGOs, both internationally and domestically, had requested stronger human rights language. They had requested certain benchmarks be made, one of which was releasing political prisoners. Vietnam met none of these benchmarks. And yet the European Union went ahead with this trade agreement, which Vietnam can then say, okay, well, it doesn't really look like the international community cares very much about human rights if they ask us to do something and then give us a reward for not actually doing it. So I think, Bethany and Jay had both mentioned global Magnitsky and other sanctions regimes. And now the EU is considering that. The UK just implemented their own form of global Magnitsky. So I think that's one way to go about it, to try to, Both People SOS and others have done a great job at identifying perpetrators of human rights abuses who have had either command responsibility or have been directly involved in torture and other abuses. I think it's high time to try to get those folks named on lists in the US or in the UK or Canada, and try to cut off their access to these countries, their financial, their bank accounts in these countries as well, and try to make it impossible for them to do business anywhere in the world. I think that's one way to go about it.
Carl, there's a question from a viewer from Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
You know her, but she goes by her alias as Phi, Tina.
Mm-hmm.
Her question for you is, Carl, you have written many letters to advocate for the release of prisoners of conscience. Has there been any result, any positive results from that advocacy?
I think we haven't seen very many releases of political prisoners due to these letters, unfortunately. But I think there are small changes in the way the Vietnamese government acts as a result of these letters, right? We've talked about, unfortunately, some prisoners have been subjected to incommunicado detention or have been suffered from torture. We know prisoners like Pham Kim Khan have been beaten by prison guards. They've refused to send his mail from prison. So in putting these letters out, we're letting the Vietnamese government know that certain governments, certain organizations are aware of these cases. They're getting information about them. And I think the Vietnamese government then becomes more careful about how they treat these prisoners. And little by little, they back off from the terrible treatment they're receiving. So I think that's one tangible outcome in these letters. We'd love to see more prisoners released. Unfortunately, we need more pressure from Western governments to accomplish that, and we're not getting as much support as we would like on that front right now.
Yeah, I have another question here. Unfortunately, I think it's directed to the two senators, but their staff is not here. But if you'd like to address it, please
Sure.
welcome. There's a viewer from Germany, and the question is: the U.S. was considering for years to designate Vietnam as a CPC. That's country of particular concern. Why has still not happening? What can we do more to make it happen?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I know that the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has recommended for every year since 2004 that Vietnam be designated a CPC. It was designated between 2004 and 2006. Since 2006, the State Department has repeatedly given it waivers, and it hasn't designated it a CPC. I'm not sure. That time span spans two different presidential administrations, a Democrat and a Republican, who could not be more different. So obviously there are very different concerns in not granting that CPC designation for Vietnam. It may be on one hand, the hope that human rights will get better, and that this, rather than trying to use a stick, the administrations are using a carrot, and that there would be some movement on religious freedom. That has not been the case over 14 years. So I really could not tell you what their thinking is. But, as Bethany and Jay both said, Senator Cornyn and Senator Rubio have brought this up. So there are very powerful members within the U.S. government who are trying to get that CPC designation reinstated. And what we can do is give them our support and try to do as much as we can to build indisputable evidence that Vietnam should be under the CPC designation.
Thank you, Carl. Last Friday. Oh, yeah. Someone?
Yeah.
Yes. Mr.
I am Ben Ngo. So I'm very happy to meet you, Carl. I also study in American University. I study political science there. So about our association of independent journalists in Vietnam. So there are signs that Facebook blocked our article and blocked our readership from our paper, our articles. So as a organization advocating for freedom, how can Freedom Now and other similar organizations can help to stop those kind of activities? Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Which activities are you referring to?
So Facebook kind of try to restrict the access to our articles. Yeah.
Yes, an excellent question, and one unfortunately I don't have a good answer for either, right? As you saw from the Reuters report earlier this year, Facebook is willing to restrict content as long as it doesn't cost them users, right? They're willing to do whatever the Vietnamese government says as long as they can keep their user base. And after this report came out, Facebook made this statement saying, we respect human rights, and we feel that allowing Vietnamese users to have access to Facebook is the most important thing. That's not right, right? yes, in an ideal world, we want everyone to have Facebook. We want them to have unrestricted freedom of expression, but that's not what Facebook is providing. Facebook is providing an online portal that the Vietnamese government has final say over, that they can restrict all the content on it. And unfortunately, that's the reality we live in. Is now these with the new cybersecurity law, Vietnam essentially has control over content that is managed by international technology companies. I think we need to, in a regular kind of Vietnam advocacy day where these folks would have gone off and spoken to congressional offices, I would have said this is the most important thing to bring up besides political prisoners, is that now these technology companies are essentially becoming de facto censors for the Vietnamese government. And there needs to be some sort of response from the US government about this. I know we just saw several hearings on the Hill with very high-ranking technology officials, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. So I would say, in your interactions with Senator Rubio and Senator Corbyn and other offices, definitely bring this up. I don't think this is a well-known fact. The Vietnamese government is doing this. I think they should be educated about it. And let's do our best to try to elevate this issue among US and EU and UK officials as best we can.
Yes, thank you, Carl. Back to the question or the comments from the viewer, Dr. Thục Quyên in Germany. Last Friday, Ambassador at Large Sam Brownback did describe very well that Vietnam was very clever. They tried to not to cross the threshold for CPC designation. So they approached that, and then they back off a little bit just to stay away from being designated. However, with the Frank R. Wolf International Religious Freedom Act that was passed by Congress in late 2016, about the same time as the Global Magnitsky Act, now there's a new designation, and that's the special watch list for those that came very close to CPC but not crossing the threshold. So we maybe should be pushing at least for that. So if there's a recognition by the State Department that yes, Vietnam is about there, but not yet there, at least they should be on the special watch list. And just like for the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, if you're on that list for 2 years in a row and there's no improvement, then automatically in the third year you drop to the CPC list. Yeah. So that might be another strategy that we have to think of among us, the community of human rights organizations. Thank you. So we can entertain one more question for Carl, and then we have to close the first part of this panel. So any question? Any outstanding questions here? No. So, Carl, you have any concluding remark before we close the first part of the panel?
I'll just say, well, again, thank you so much for organizing this. I think it was very helpful to hear from both Senator Rubio and Senator Corbyn's office. I would just say, in these COVID times, let's not cease engagement with these offices. Let's continue to reach out with them. I would say take Bethany up on her offer of circulating her email address, or reach out to her about specific cases, about specific concerns, and let's not take our foot off the gas, right? Let's kind of try to keep the pressure on Vietnam as much as we can in these COVID times.
And again, thank you very much, Carl, for always being there for us. And we truly appreciate the very long-standing partnership with Freedom Now. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tong. Have a wonderful day to you and everyone else.